Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're going to be tackling something today that I know is important to all of you out there, and that is uh, figuring out how to choose the right educational path for your kids.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think can feel really overwhelming as a parent. There's a lot of different options out there and a lot of pressure to make the quote unquote right choice.
Right, exactly. And I think we've only probably felt that pressure at one point or another, you know, wondering if maybe traditional school is the only way or feeling like, we have to find that perfect fit for our kids.
Right.
And there's so much information out there. So today we're going to try to help you sort through all of that and really make an informed decision that's right for your family. And we're going to be looking at a segment from the Parenting and Education podcast, which I think you'll find really interesting.
Yeah, this podcast segment does a really good job of breaking down the two main educational paths that parents are considering these days, traditional schooling and homeschooling.
Yeah, those are the two big ones, right? And I think a lot of people, they kind of have this idea of what each one is like, but it's helpful to kind of really dive into the pros and cons of each, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And that's really what this podcast segment does so well.
Cool. So let's jump right in. What are some of the advantages of traditional schooling? What are some of the things that make it a really great option for some kids?
Well, I think the biggest advantage of traditional schooling is the structure that it provides. Kids know what to expect each day, they have a set schedule, and they're surrounded by other kids their age.
Yeah, I can see how that routine would be really beneficial for some kids, especially younger ones who really thrive on that predictability, right?
Exactly. And not only that, but traditional schools also have access to a lot of resources that you might not have at home. They have libraries, labs, art studios, gymnasiums, all sorts of things that can really enrich a child's education.
Yeah, definitely. And not just facilities, but also a wide range of teachers who can really bring different things to the classroom.
That's true. And another big advantage of traditional schooling is the social interaction that it provides. Kids are constantly interacting with their peers, learning how to work together, how to resolve conflicts, and how to navigate social situations.
Right. Those are all important skills that they're going to need throughout their lives. And I think, for some kids, school is really where they make their best friends. And those relationships can be so important.
Absolutely. So, there are a lot of good reasons why traditional schooling remains the most popular choice for most families.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, it's just what we know, right? It's the path that we took ourselves, and it could feel familiar and safe.
Right.
But I'm guessing, and I think the podcast segment also alluded to this, that it's not without its challenges. What are some of the downsides of the traditional school system that parents should be aware of?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest concerns that a lot of parents have is the issue of large class sizes. When you have 30 or more kids in a class, it can be really hard for teachers to give each student the individual attention they need.
Yeah, that's a valid concern, and I think it's something that's been made even more difficult in recent years with budget cuts and teacher shortages.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of standardized testing, which I think is a huge source of stress for both kids and parents these days. The emphasis on test scores can sometimes feel like it's taking away from the joy of learning.
Totally. It can feel like teaching to the test instead of teaching the whole child.
Right. And then there's the fact that the curriculum in traditional schools can be pretty rigid. There's not always a lot of room for flexibility or for pursuing individual interests. If your child is really passionate about, say, robotics or creative writing, they might not get the opportunity to really delve into those subjects in a traditional school setting.
That makes sense. And I think that kind of rigidity can be especially challenging for kids who learn differently, who maybe need a different pace or a different approach to learning.
Definitely. So while traditional schooling has a lot of advantages, I think it's important for parents to be aware of these potential drawbacks as well.
Yeah, it's a great option for some kids, but it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the other side of the coin, homeschooling. Now, I think for a lot of people, homeschooling kind of conjures up this image of, kids learning at the kitchen table in their pajamas, maybe doing some baking as part of a math lesson.
Well, there's definitely a lot of flexibility in homeschooling, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the appeal for a lot of families, right? That ability to kind of tailor the learning experience to their child's individual needs and interests.
Definitely. One of the biggest advantages of homeschooling is that you can really personalize the curriculum to fit your child's learning style.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. So let's say your child is a visual learner. They might struggle with traditional textbook-based learning, but they really come alive when they can see and experience things firsthand.
Okay, I can see how that would be a challenge in a traditional classroom setting.
Exactly, but with homeschooling, you can incorporate all sorts of hands-on activities, field trips, visual aids, things that really bring the learning to life. You can make it much more engaging and exciting for them.
I love that. And I think it also allows kids to kind of really dive deep into their passions, right? If your child has a particular interest, whether it's dinosaurs or astronomy or, medieval history, you can really structure their learning around those interests.
Absolutely. And you can go at their pace. If they're really into something, you can spend more time on it. If they're struggling with something, you can slow down and really work through it until they get it. You don't have to be bound by a strict curriculum or a set timeline.
I think that's amazing, and I could see how that would be so beneficial for some kids. But I know there are also challenges to homeschooling. And maybe the biggest one, at least for me, if I think about it, is the time commitment. It seems like it would require such a huge investment of time and energy from parents.
It definitely does. You're essentially taking on the role of teacher, curriculum designer, and activity coordinator, all rolled into one.
Wow, that's a lot to juggle. And I imagine for a lot of families, it's just not realistic, especially if both parents work outside the home.
Right. And even if you're a stay-at-home parent, it can still be very demanding. You need to be organized, you need to be patient, and you need to be willing to put in the time and effort. It's not for everyone.
Definitely. Are there any other potential downsides that parents should be aware of?
Yeah. Another common concern is socialization. When kids are homeschooled, they don't have the same opportunities for daily interaction with their peers as they would in a traditional school setting.
That's a valid point. And I think it's something that parents who are considering homeschooling really need to think carefully about. Because as much as we might want to protect our kids from, the negative aspects of school culture, like bullying or peer pressure, social interaction is so important for their development.
Exactly. And it's not just about making friends and having fun. It's about learning how to navigate social situations, how to resolve conflicts, how to work together as part of a team, all those important social skills that they're going to need throughout their lives.
Right. So it's really about finding ways to supplement that social interaction if you're homeschooling, whether it's through homeschooling groups, community activities, extracurricular activities, whatever works for your family.
Exactly. And then there's also the issue of extracurriculars. In a traditional school, kids have access to a wide range of extracurricular activities like sports, music, drama, art, you name it. But when you're homeschooling, you often have to be more proactive about finding those opportunities for your kids.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine the cost of those activities can add up quickly too, right? Especially if you have multiple kids who are all interested in different things.
Right. It's definitely something to factor into your budget if you're considering homeschooling.
Okay, so it sounds like both traditional schooling and homeschooling have their own unique advantages and challenges. But I keep thinking back to something you said earlier about the importance of really understanding where your child is on their developmental journey.
Yes, that's absolutely key. No matter which path you choose, whether it's traditional schooling or homeschooling, you need to make sure that it's a good fit for your child's developmental needs.
Can you say a little more about what you mean by that? What are some of the developmental factors that parents should be considering?
Well, first and foremost, you need to have a good understanding of your child's individual developmental milestones. Where are they at physically, cognitively, socially, emotionally?
Right, because all kids develop at their own pace, and what's normal for one child might be different for another, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about comparing your child to other kids. It's about really understanding their individual strengths and challenges.
So how can parents really know if their child is on track developmentally? Where can they turn for that information?
If your child is in a traditional school, the best resource is their teacher. Teachers spend a lot of time with your child and they're trained to observe their development. They can give you valuable insights into your child's progress and alert you to any potential concerns.
That makes sense, but what about parents who are homeschooling? They don't have that same access to a teacher's expertise.
That's true, but there are still plenty of resources available. You can talk to your pediatrician, you can consult with a child development specialist, you can do some research online. There are a lot of great websites and books out there that can provide guidance.
So it sounds like regardless of which path you choose, communication is key. Whether it's with your child's teacher, your pediatrician, or other experts, you need to be having those conversations and asking those questions.
Absolutely. And it's also important to trust your gut. As a parent, you know your child better than anyone. If you have a feeling that something isn't quite right, don't hesitate to seek professional guidance.
I love that. Okay, so let's wrap things up here. What are some key takeaways from our deep dive today?
Well, we've explored two main paths, traditional schooling and homeschooling. We've talked about the pros and cons of each approach, and we've emphasized the importance of considering your child's individual developmental needs.
Right, because there's no one right answer when it comes to education. It's really about finding what works best for your child and your family.
Exactly.
And one thing that really stood out to me in the Parenting and Education podcast segment is that, you're not alone in this journey. There's so much support available for parents, whether it's online communities, homeschooling groups, educational consultants, or people out there who can help you navigate this process.
Absolutely. And, even just talking to other parents, friends, family members, people who have been through this themselves can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's always good to get different perspectives. So, to all the parents out there who are grappling with these decisions, I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. And now that you've considered the pros and cons of both traditional schooling and homeschooling, I want to leave you with this question. What aspects of each approach resonate most strongly with your values and your child's needs? This deep dive is just the starting point. The real journey begins with your own exploration.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us today.
Of course, it's always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Sounds good.